So hello, everybody. My name is Tali Reiner-Brodetsky. I'm from Philadelphia. I'm a co-founder of Hope for Israel Alliance, HIA. Before we get started, if you need captioning, there is information in the chat for your use. HIA is a grassroots Zionist movement led by volunteers across the world. We advocate for the people of Israel against anti-Semitism and, most importantly, the release of the hostages held by Hamas. Today, we mark 501 days that they are still in hell. Today, we also have heard news that 4 hostages that were murdered will be released this Thursday, and that 6 living hostages will be released this Saturday. Well, we are very excited with the return of every hostage. We have mixed emotions about their status and about the hostages that are not a part of this deal and remain in Gaza. And we will keep fighting for them until the last one returns home. This webinar is produced by HIA and AID Coalition, a coalition that we are a part of. AID Coalition is a US not-for-profit organization whose mission is the strengthening and preserving the democratic foundation of the State of Israel. Since the events of October 7th, AID Coalition has managed a platform that supports dozens of social projects and organizations like HIA that help those in need, providing psychosocial support, food kitchens, culture events, clothing, and much, much more. In the upcoming 2025 elections for the World Zionist Congress, AID Coalition is working with various pro-democracy organizations and is the only slate that is not affiliated with any political party or religious movement, with a single focus of reprioritizing the vast resources of the World Zionist institutions to rebuild Israel, support Israeli communities, and ensuring that these resources are directed to where they are generally needed. And we hope that you will join us in this quest. For more information about HIA, AID Coalition, and the elections, please follow the links in the chat. I'm honored to have with us today Eyal Hulata. Unfortunately, our other planned guest, Barak Ravid, could not join us as planned. So let me introduce Eyal. Eyal Hulata is a senior international fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the FDD, and he is in fact its first foreign visiting fellow. From 2021 to 2023, he served as Israel's National Security Advisor and the head of Israel's National Security Council, the NSC, leading efforts on Iran, a maritime border deal with Lebanon, and strategic US-Israel consulations. Previously, he had held key national security roles for over 20 years and worked in fintech and climate tech. He's also a recipient of the Israeli Defense Award. Eyal holds degrees in physics from the Hebrew University and Tel Aviv University, and also an MA from Harvard Kennedy School. So we're glad to have you here, Eyal. And
Thank you.
especially today, when I think we are all thinking about the hostage deal, and we're trying to understand all these new developments of the past few days. So what can you tell us about these changes and of the first phase of the deal, and what would it mean for the second phase of the deal?
So first, thank you for having me. I'm happy to speak at this event. And I'm happy to hear and know that so many people are interested in understanding more about the situation as it evolves. Clearly, these are very dense and tense days in Israel when hostages are being released wave after wave in small doses. And then you said 2 days from now, it will be a difficult day, naturally, to get 4 murdered civilians, among them the Bibas family. Everybody knows the Bibas family by now. those beautiful toddlers, babies with the red head, will be coming back. Unfortunately, they're not alive, and this will be a day of mourning in Israel. A couple of days later, on Saturday, as you said, 6 live hostages will come back, and among them are two that have been captured in Gaza, not for 500 days, but for 3,500 days. Vera Mengistu and Hisham Said, that were abducted in 2014. And they've been held in prison in Gaza for more than 10 years now. So as we look at it I think regardless of where people are on the political spectrum in Israel, these are very difficult days. And the closure, if I can use that word, of the tragedy that happened on October 7, the complete failure that happened on October 7, in my mind, can only be done once all of the hostages come back, all of them, the lives won, and those who were murdered, either abducted, killed, or murdered in Gaza. All of them need to come back to Israel, and this can only happen if the entire deal will come through. The second phase and then the third phase. And indeed, there is controversy in Israel whether or not Hamas will be willing to go the full way and to return all of the hostages, knowing that this is their final mean of leverage, and maybe their final mean of insurance against Israel going back to hostility. And this debate in Israel, unfortunately, has also a mirroring in the Israel political sector, because there are indeed in the Israeli government at the moment extreme factions who would rather see Israel go back to fighting and execute what they think is the Trump vision as he laid it out during Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit in Washington a week ago. And this internal debate in Israel makes things even more complicated as we move ahead. I expect the second phase to start. I wouldn't say as planned necessarily, because we're already not on time. But when the president's emissary Witkoff is in Israel at the moment, and talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu, he makes it very clear to him that President Trump's intention is that the hostage deal will continue. I think Secretary Rubio said similar things in Israel during his visit in the last few days. It doesn't mean that things will go as planned. There is an Israeli decision to be made. There is a Hamas decision to be made. But my hope is, maybe more than expectation, my hope is that the second phase will start as planned, and that we'll see eventually all of the hostages coming back, as I believe is so important for the social fabric of Israel. There's a moral debt by the Israeli government to its people after such a failure of October 7.
So you mentioned that everybody is skeptical whether Hamas will actually continue with this and maybe lose their leverage. So what kind of pressure would it take for them to move forward?
So I think the major thing that has changed in the region with respect to the hostage deal is in fact the election of Donald Trump and his entering into the White House, as the audience all I think understands very well. The entire dynamic of the negotiation is shifted once Trump won the election. It became clear that his ability to exert pressure on all of the parties, on the mediators, on the Qataris, on the Egyptians, and through them on Hamas, but also in a sense on Israel and the government, making sure everybody understands that from his perspective, time has run out, and the war needs to come to an end. The ceasefire needs to commence, and hostages need to start getting back. And it was important to hear the president, I think, from the outset, saying that when he says hostages coming back, he means all of them. There are dual nationals. There were 7 Americans, Keith Stigall and Sagid Dekelchen, have already been returned, but there are still 5 more. And when he says all of them, he means that literally the entire group of hostages in its totality. And I think that this delivered a very important message. First, to the mediators, who immediately exert pressure on Hamas, telling them enough is enough, time is run out, let's commence this. And this is also true in Israel, because as we know, it's not easy for the Israeli government, for this Israeli government, to take those decisions, understanding that this will eventually lead to the end of the fighting, to a permanent ceasefire, with a commitment of the United States to it. This was how all of this has started with the first phase. I think once President Trump delivered his message during the press conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying, or laying out his vision, if you want, on the future of Gaza, and floating this idea that Gaza needs not only to be evacuated so that it can be restored and people can come back to homes after they've been built, but in fact to evacuate the strip completely and to resettle the population of Gaza elsewhere. And this has been in the air for a week. Several people, I live here in Washington. I spoke to many of them. They said, it doesn't really mean it. It's just as a means of leverage. It's just using this to exert pressure on the region, on the Arab countries, and so forth. But day after day, he continued to develop this idea, putting more flesh on the bones of that issue, and going even further, saying that local population will not be able to go back, and the United States will control the strip. And you all know how this debate has been going on. I'm very cognizant to the fact that his staff, his professional team around him, Secretary Rubio, National Security Advisor Waltz, and I think even Steve Witkoff, have been using maybe this message has been delivered by Trump to tell the region, to tell all of the countries in the region, we've been talking about this for such a long time. You haven't brought any fresh ideas to the table. You've said that you care about the Palestinians, but you've done nothing concrete to create conditions for reconstruction of Gaza and so forth. And I think Secretary Rubio just the other day from Israel said to all of the Arab countries, well, this is our idea. Now it's your turn to put forth something that is different. I think this created a new dynamic among the Arab countries. There's supposed to be a convention of the five major Arab partners in this, and I know that they're all debating amongst themselves what kind of different solutions they can bring forth that can be sufficient. I think they all share the understanding that when all this ends, Hamas should not be ruling Gaza. I hear this from contacts I have in the Gulf, but also in the more immediate region. They all understand that Hamas governing of Gaza is a risk not only to Israel, not only to us, but also to their national security. It doesn't mean that necessarily they know how to resolve that, but there is, I think, a new atmosphere, a new motion of ideas towards that end. And hopefully this will create a new momentum in this. This can only happen if we go and continue into the second phase of the deal, and when IDF is not needed to go back to intense fighting in Gaza. But that may actually happen if, as I said in the beginning, if Hamas will not be willing to release all of the hostages and decide that they need to keep some of the live the male soldiers or younger aged hostages, so that Muhammad Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar's brother, feels secure in the tunnel he's hiding in. In such a case, there won't be a ceasefire. The IDF will not be leaving Gaza, and we should expect the continuation of a war. I hope this will not happen. I hope that the dynamics that I described will take an effect, and that we will see a different outcome of this tension.
So, but how do you think if the IDF pulls out and we're not interested in Hamas being in charge, who will step in? Are there any key players in the regions that are willing to do that? But what are the realistic possibilities?
Right, Tali, this is, I think, a very important question, because this is the most this is the major unknown. The Strip has always been a problematic region throughout the decades. There have always been radical groups, very violent radical groups, Hamas in different forms, and before that, in my our parents' generation, they were called Fedayuns, and they were coming from Jordan, coming from Sinai, and all of those incidents were always very violent and extreme. So to envision a different solution is really very difficult. And I think, in fact, this is one of the main reasons why the Israeli public is so reluctant to believe that there could be a different alternative. But when we look at it from a more kind of, I don't want to use the word strategic too much, but if we look at it from a more broad perspective, the understanding that Hamas cannot be rooted out of Gaza just by the power of force, I think at this point, after 500 days of fighting, in which the IDF has achieved military gains that exceed any of the other campaigns that we had in Gaza. But having said that, we were not able to make Hamas completely surrender, even though we were able to kill almost all of its leadership, the vast majority of its fighters. Hamas is down to I think IDF estimate that I saw in the media lately is that it's maybe several hundreds of rockets. Most of them are short range. This is what they have left. And even in these conditions, Hamas continues to rule Gaza. One of the things that I'm particularly frustrated about is that the Israeli establishment, the Israeli government, were not pushing for the creation of an alternative civilian governance in Gaza while the war was still waging. Just think what could have happened if, when we finished evacuating the city of Gaza, there were already introduced local governance of people who want to live their lives, and there are in fact people like that in Gaza. I think reluctance of this Israeli government to see a civilian population ruled by Palestinians is so severe that there were no conditions to allow this to happen. But I regret that. I think that this would have been an important chain of events. And eventually, I think it is what will happen. You asked about the other Arab countries. There has been extensive deliberations with various countries in the region, done by the Israeli government, by representatives speaking on behalf of the prime minister, talking about these kind of ideas. We've seen some of it already in the media. People may recall there was an exposure of the plan of how to deal with the humanitarian aid, with an American contracting company that will step in and deal with the law and order surrounding this humanitarian aid. This is just a part of a larger plan that has been already discussed and negotiated with Gulf countries. So there are things that can happen. None of them do not bear risk. I think the first fundamental principle that any Israeli government, this one, the ones that will come afterward, will need to ensure is that the security situation can only be secured and maintained by IDF proactive activity. We will need to make sure that there is no smuggling of arms into Gaza. We will need to make sure that we're able to secure the border way better than we did before, and also to interdict if radical groups are able to do things that they've committed not to do. This is true in Gaza. This will be true also in Lebanon. Today is, in fact, the day where the IDF has withdrawn from Lebanon almost entirely. And this is going to be the balance that will make sure how this happens. I believe that there must be local governance in Gaza. Otherwise, Israel will need to fully occupy the Strip. I do not believe that there is a possibility to evacuate the entire population of Gaza. And I don't think that anyone should promote any idea of doing such thing by use of force. This is not something that I think anyone should believe that is applicable to a civilian population, even for the Gazans. So there must be a different alternative. It's going to be shaky. It's going to take time. We will need to be very vigilant and make sure that this does not deteriorate into a new security risk. But in fact, we are starting from conditions which are, at least from the security standpoint, favorable. Hamas is weakened. There is a clear understanding of all the countries around that they need to participate in this. And there is a president in the White House who is fully committed to put all of his weight into this with full commitment that the situation will not go back where the Israeli population is at risk. So I think all of those conditions create something that we can work with, that the Israeli government should work with. I hope it happens. And even if they don't, this is something that will need to be dealt with in the following years. This is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, so I mean, I understand everybody has an understanding now that Hamas needs to be dealt with, but they're only a proxy, right? They're a proxy of Iran. And we've noticed how the changes in the area, in Syria, in Lebanon, but Iran is still there. Is that anything that happened in the region changed anything in Iran and its strategic plans and their ability to impact Israel and the region?
Right, Tali. So I think this is exactly the right time to talk about the real strategic threat that Israel is facing. That, God forbid, could become existential if Iran is able to fulfill its plans and to acquire nuclear weapons. This will pose a threat on the state of Israel, the Israeli population, that exceeds anything else that we've ever seen. October 7, as devastating as it was not existential to Israel. There was just a limit to what Hamas can do, and I think this is true for terror organizations. Hezbollah, which was the strongest force or proxy force that Iran has put on the borders of Israel to put severe threats. If, God forbid, October 7 would have started in the north rather than in Gaza, I think the outcome would have been even worse. Unfortunately, that's what we've seen in the communities around Gaza. But this is not how things have evolved with Hezbollah. Israel has the upper hand. I think in the last quarter of 24, what the Israeli establishment has been able to do in Lebanon on Hezbollah is unprecedented. We have never seen anything remotely close to the damage that Hezbollah has suffered. Not only Nasrallah and his top commanders and terrorists, but the distributed operations that we've seen with the pagers and the walkie-talkies and the raids of the Air Force that were very targeted with incredible intelligence that allowed to be very precise and effective. And Hezbollah was incapable of responding the way they wanted. The IDF was really able to for a change to put them on the lower side, and we haven't seen anything in this magnitude before. The same happened with the direct strikes from Iran. Iran did this twice, as everybody recall, in April and then in October. Their ability to incur damage in Israel was very limited because of, I think, very effective defense multi-layer system that were developed over many years. But in reverse, especially in October, what the IDF, the Air Force were able to incur on Iran, I think was proof to the Iranians that Israel can attack any point in Iran, take out their strategic air defenses, and any target that Israel will decide to attack in Iran can be hit with a high level of success. I think this puts Iran in a dilemma. Their strategy, their ring of fire strategy of the proxies around Israel has clearly vanished, at least for the next few years. It did cause the most severe damage Israel has seen since its conception in October 7, but this is not the case anymore, not with Hamas, not with Hezbollah. And Iran is, I think, cognizant of that fact. And the supreme leader will need to decide, what does he do now? Does he try to restore this proxy capability for future ability to attack on Israel? Will he try to dash for the bomb and acquire the nuclear weapon in a belief that this will allow him some kind of deterrence, or something else? This is what Israel needs to be very aware of and worried. And the intelligence efforts to make sure that we understand where Iran is heading is crucial, and the ability to respond in time or to be proactive for a change also on Iran is clearly the main thing that we need to be focused on. This is, I think, a major reason why me and people like me believe that it is important that we achieve a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, because this is no longer the place where the major threats to our national security reside, and we need to be open, focused, alert, and capable, and devote the resources that are necessary to prepare ourselves for a potential need to militarily attack Iran should all of the other attempts fail to deal with the nuclear program in other means. President Trump, I think, is very committed to this topic, and we hear his aides, Secretary of State Rubio, has spoke about this very clearly during his visit to Israel, and again, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and all of them are talking about the need to make sure that Iran will never be able to acquire a nuclear weapon. President Biden administration used very similar terms. I was National Security Advisor when we received what is called the Jerusalem Declaration, where the President of the United States signed his name under the commitment of the United States to use all of the national security powers to prevent Iran from ever acquiring a nuclear weapon. I think the ability of President Trump to put more substance into this, at least for the moment, seems very, very strong. And I hope that this will be the case. The restoration of the sanction regime, of the enforcement of a sanction regime, of the maximum pressure campaign, I think is very important in making sure that the Supreme Leader of Iran understand that he better be very, very careful with what he does in the next few years. When you follow the exchange rate of the rial of the Iranian currency, just since November, since the announcement of Trump as the winner of the elections, the inflation has been dramatic. I think from 700,000 rial per dollar, it's almost at 900,000 rial per dollar. Rates of inflation that Iran has never seen. You follow the news, if you see there's shortage of electricity, there's shortage of water, there's shortage of food all across Iran. Iran is not in a good situation in this regard. And I think that all of those efforts collectively need to be put on the Supreme Leader so that he will understand that he'll need to make the concessions on the nuclear program with the effort of the United States to achieve not just a quick negotiated deal, but a good, secure, and robust negotiated nuclear deal. If that is possible, great. And if not, then Israel will need to be prepared to do whatever it takes to prevent Iran from ever being able to reach a nuclear weapon.
Do you think now, because of everything that's happened with Hamas and Hezbollah, there's a greater opportunity to have this coalition of countries against the Iranian regime and moving that forward?
So, Tali, I think what is more eminent is the possibility to have a regional coalition. I'll put it at that. I'm not sure that we'll ever see any other country other than Israel willing and able to militarily act against Iran. I think the Gulf countries are more worried about the damage that can happen to themselves, and I don't expect them to act offensively against Iran at this point. This is Israel's role. And in the right circumstances, maybe CENTCOM role as well. I was very happy to see those countries come to Israel's defense over during the Iranian attempts to strike Israel, both in April of 24 and October of 24. This is more significant than most people understand. Just think what it means for all of those countries, including Saudi Arabia, that has not normalized its relation with Israel, but also countries like Jordan, with the streets bubbling over the war in Gaza, and at the height of the war, joining efforts with CENTCOM and sharing intelligence and fighter jets in the air. This is very substantial. We have not seen this kind of alliance, this kind of collaboration between the regional countries come to the defense of one another. And Israel is committed to do that as well. I think, when I was National Security Advisor and there were Iranian missiles and cruise missiles fired from Yemen on the United Arab Emirates, Israel responded almost immediately, not only to offer sympathy, but also to engage with the Emirates and to see what kind of capabilities they might need to enhance their defenses capabilities, because this is what partners do. And I think that we are, after the Abraham Accords precedent, the fact that those Abraham Accord countries not only did not cut their ties with Israel, the diplomatic ties, the economic ties, the only country that continues to fly direct to Israel other than El Al, as some of you may know, is the Emirates. You can fly Dubai and Etihad and Emirates back and forth to Israel. United haven't started flying back to Israel from the United States of America, our greatest strategic ally. You cannot fly direct from the United States of America to Israel other than El Al, but you can do this from Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Just to understand the commitment that those countries see, not to the Israeli government, but to the Israeli position, the Israeli posture, the potential joint future that they can have with an alliance with Israel. And this is all very important components. Now, of course, the crucial element to it, and the question that everybody asks in Washington, in Jerusalem, and I think also in Riyadh, is can this be transformed to normalizing the relationships with Saudi Arabia? We're very close to doing this, I think, in October 23, just before the war. In fact, I believe that this is one of the reasons that we saw this war starting, because normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia was potentially the worst nightmare that Iran could have envisioned. I think also for Hamas, they did not possess or potentially put good vibes into the future of their hopes of how the Middle East would look like. Can we still restore this? I'm sure that we can. In what time frame? Well, that will depend on various things that need to happen. Without a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, without the return of the hostages, there is no way to see how this can happen. The Saudi Crown Prince has made it very, very clear that you will need to see substantial, robust stability and political horizon with the Palestinians, with Israel. This is not something that is easy for any Israeli government, let alone this one, to give at this point. But these are all the components that would potentially, I think in the future, in the coming years, maybe even sooner, could lead to an emergence of a normalization process with Saudi Arabia.
Right. So going back to Gaza, I think one of our greatest fears with all these hostage deals is that the release of a lot of terrorists. And one of the questions that came up in the chat is, aren't these releases going to replenish Hamas and make Hamas stronger again, and then we lose our advantage once more? And how can we, keep the success that we have now over Hamas and keep them a smaller organization like they are today?
Right. So, of course, hostage deals in general come in an enormous price. And in this case, the cumulative amount of terrorists that will be released will be significant. Everybody are still traumatized by the release of about 1,000 terrorists for Gilad Shalit at the time. Among them is Yahya Sinwar, that turned Gaza and Hamas into the monstrous terror organization that we've all experienced in October 7th. So, of course, the Israelis are traumatized. In fact, everyone should be worried about that. But I think that at this point, the importance of releasing the hostages is so immense that this price, if to call it this way, is a necessary evil, but let alone necessary. Now, the outcome of that, of course, will be something that we will need to deal with as a security establishment into the future. We will need to follow those people. We'll need to see where they are. We'll need to follow and see if they re-engage in terror. And I don't expect this round to be the last conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, because until they are completely removed from power, as I said before, only the IDF can ensure the security and the sense of security of the Israeli population in Gaza. Having said all of that, the sheer number of the prisoners that would be released throughout this deal is not even close to the amount of terrorists younger, better equipped, and better trained that the IDF has killed during the Gaza war. So I'm not as worried about the sheer number of the people that we release. Will this give some kind of momentum to the people in Gaza? Yes, of course. Will they claim that they have won? I think they would have done it anyway. As long as we're not able to get to full surrender of Hamas, their narrative would be that they were able to stand in front of the IDF um, um, and uh, uh, and not surrender, and in their terms, win. And this is the case whether we release the prisoners or not. The security threat by Hamas does not end in a permanent ceasefire, and the collective efforts, the military ones and the non-military ones that I spoke before, and others that will need to come in the future, are all important to ensure that Hamas cannot restore its power. The most important thing is to prevent arms from being smuggled into Gaza. Everybody understands that this smuggling happened over many years through the Rafah crossing, maybe also through tunnels, but unfortunately most of them were just smuggled through the Rafah crossing from Sinai. Israel was not vigilant enough to enforce that this smuggling route. Many people have profited in Sinai and in Egypt from this smuggling. This is a big problem that we will definitely need to act completely different in the future on. And there are plans to do this. It's not going to be easy. Nothing is going to be easy with this regard. But I wouldn't want to have hostages left in Gaza just because we weren't willing to pay a price that I believe is something that we can deal with, especially that now that we're in full understanding of all of the weakness of some of the policies and strategies that we used vis-a-vis Hamas over the last almost 20 years.
Will some of these plans involve Egypt to secure those borders of smuggling? Do you believe that?
Well, we definitely need to do this on the Egyptian side, but I don't want to put my trust in what the Egyptian government will do. This is where the United States of America come in. So the fact that we need to rebuild the Rafah crossing, because most of the goods will continue to go into Gaza through Sinai, unless Israel intends to allow all of the goods to come into Gaza from the Erez crossing or from Kerem Shalom. I don't think this is applicable. But we'll need to make sure that there is no smuggling coming through Rafah. We need to rebuild the Rafah crossing. And there is close deliberation between the Israel establishment, the American establishment, to agree on how this will be rebuilt, managed, and operated in a way that will not allow Egyptian corruption or a collusion to allow such amount of smuggling to go in. We'll also need to make sure that there are no tunnels under Philadelphia corridor. There's, at least for now in Israel, Prime Minister insists that we will have soldiers in the Philadelphia corridor. I will not contradict that. I will just say that the best way to ensure that there are no tunnels under the Philadelphia corridor is by building an underground barrier like the one that we've built on the eastern border, on the northern border of Gaza. Everybody's talking about how easy it was for Hamas to barge through the above ground barrier, the fence. But in fact, the underground barrier, which is a very thick concrete wall going down more than 100 feet, 200 feet when necessary, has completely stopped the problem of underground tunnels. There were no penetrating tunnels into Israel on October 7 because we were able to deal with that problem. Sometimes there are solutions and engineering solutions to problems, and all of this will need to be incorporated also in the border with Sinai to make sure that there are no smuggling. We're definitely going to need to have better intelligence, and by and large, we're just going to need to take this problem seriously.
I just thought it was an arms race. If we build a barrier, they'll just dig deeper. But I guess
well,
they
they will
have their
always
limitations.
try. But when I mean we need to take this seriously, I think we've proven. If we look at what happened with Hezbollah and also look at what happened with Iran, we don't always have to lose in those races. When we're serious, when we understand the threat, when we take it seriously, not treat our enemies with a light thinking we need to overestimate our enemies, not to underestimate our enemies. And in fact, we need to be sincere about this. We did not take Hamas seriously enough, and this resulted the most catastrophic failure that we've seen, in fact, since the conception of Israel. But this does not have to be the case. When Israel is awake, when Israel is serious, we know how to take care of things. And I think people have seen it in Hezbollah and also as it comes to Iran. This is the kind of Israel that I'm proud to have served in, and we definitely need to make sure that this is what we project to the future.
What are the possibilities of the Palestinian Authority taking charge in Gaza?
Well, I have to say that the current Palestinian Authority is completely incapable of not only getting into Gaza, but also in ruling the West Bank. I mean, it is a complete disaster. It's a corrupt Palestinian Authority. They have no legitimacy from their own people, and they're incapable of carrying the weight even when they try. I would like to see a fully reformed PA with different leadership committed to their own people. I'm not talking about their commitment to Israel. I don't expect them to be committed to Israel. I'm expecting them to be committed to nonviolence, and I expect them to be committed to make their lives of their own population better.
Do we hear any other civilian groups that, want to rise to the challenge?
Well, there are business people who speak to Israeli establishment and their local governance. Hamas is not as popular as it was in Gaza before the war. I think that after the war will end, we'll see more and more people in Gaza understanding that the finger of blame needs to be pointed at Hamas for doing this on October 7 and resulting this devastation of the Gaza Strip. That does not mean that they're going to like us. They won't. And unfortunately, the level of hatred and of radicalism in Gaza is immense and skyrocketing. But that does not mean that they will support Hamas going ahead. I cannot say that I know who is a potential alternative to do that. What I do know that over time, if there is none, and Israel needs to continue to provide all of the bare necessities of the population in Gaza, this will not be something that will be easy. This will take not only an economic toll, but also a toll in lives, because there will always be insurgency against it. There are various things to do. Not everything can be discussed publicly, but I do believe that there is a possibility now, with the momentum coming from the White House and with the commitment of the countries around us, to create such an alternative.
So do you think that our best efforts is from an outside player to, stabilize that region and keep the ceasefire going?
Well, I think that without an involvement of countries with interest, it will be very difficult to do that. The reconstruction of the Strip cannot happen by itself. Someone will need to pay for it, and someone will need to ensure that the resources are not used by the radicals for the wrong options. This is, from my understanding, what is happening now in the deliberations between the Arab countries to provide a plan that they believe is sufficiently well, even to appease President Trump, and to make sure that he does not continue to follow his what they call a radical solution to Gaza. I think the chances of seeing more involvement of those countries is higher, and I believe that if they are involved constructively, then the chances of more proper reconstruction is higher, and we'll need to see what they come up with. This is the ultimate test for the Saudis, for the Emiratis, and also for the Egyptians and the Jordanians, to do something that is meaningful. They've been talking all this time that they were supportive of the Palestinians, of the Gazans, and they care for their well-being, while they always said that Hamas is a problem. Well, now is their time to come in, step up, and do something that is meaningful. If that happens, maybe there is a solution. And if they don't, then unfortunately, I think we will see more and more hostility in Gaza. And I think everybody understands that this needs to be prevented. So I think there's a good chance that we see more of their efforts. To what end, we'll need to see.
So everybody, if you have some additional questions, please put them in the Q&A. One of the attendees asked, why would Hamas release all the hostages when Israel says that it will renew the war just right afterwards? Why take that chance?
Well, first of all, there are voices in Israel that are saying that, but this is not the deals that Prime Minister Netanyahu has agreed to with President Biden back in May of 24. The agreement was that when all the hostages are released, the IDF withdraws from Gaza and we have a permanent ceasefire. What Israel said all along is that if Hamas restores hostility, then we will re-engage. And I think that this is something that maybe Hamas is fearful because they in fact want to restore their rule in Gaza and to rebuild their capabilities.
And I
And this
think
is
also
exactly
some of the government member or the coalition members have been speaking about, right, that they
well.
want to continue the war. And so,
There are coalition members who are not interested in a permanent ceasefire. They're interested in the evacuation of the Strip and rebuilding of the settlements. But this is not what the Prime Minister is saying. There is a Prime Minister in Israel, and his agreements with the White House will ultimately be what counts. But the question was on Hamas. And my argument on this is that if Hamas is not really willing to release all of the hostages, then they need to understand that the war will never end. And if the war never ends, they cannot see the evacuation of the IDF from the Gaza Strip. And eventually, Mohammed Sinwar will die as well, and the new commanders that replace the previous ones will happen. The IDF can continue the war in Gaza if so needed. This is not the Israeli goal. The Israeli goal is to remove Hamas from rule of Gaza and to have all the hostages back, as the Prime Minister continues to say. At the end of the day, it is Hamas that is facing the question of how to continue to conduct this and what is left for them to do. This is where the mediators come into place, and this is where President Trump's leverage over the Qataris and the Egyptians have come into place. There were people in the Israeli establishment that didn't believe that Hamas will go into the first phase of the hostage deal either, and yes, they did. And I believe that there is momentum that would allow them also to go to the second phase. And if they don't, then the IDF will re-engage. This is exactly the dilemma, but for a change, I want the dilemma to be in the Hamas hands and not in the Israeli hands. I would want the Israeli establishment to be very, very clear with the message. We want them all back, and if we don't get them all back, then IDF stays in Gaza and will continue to fight. And the voices coming of the government are a little bit confusing, but I think this is where the Americans play a significant role. I think Steve Witkoff understands that very, very well and is communicating very, very well to all of the respective stakeholders in this. And we'll just need to see. I mean, it's a matter of days and weeks to see if the second phase negotiation starts and how this will play out.
do you think Trump's idea of transferring the people of Gaza is realistic?
Well, I have to say that people call it a plan. This is not really a plan. President Trump has issued a statement, maybe a vision of what could happen. And when he was asked about it, he said he doesn't intend this to be by force, right? And people ultimately say, both here and in Israel, well, if they want to leave, why don't they leave? This is not how the Middle East works. I don't expect the population of Gaza to pick up their stuff and move to a different place, knowing that this will end their ability to return to Gaza after this is restored, which is also something that President Trump said, right? I mean, they need to leave and never to come back. This is not the way the Middle East works. And the only way to do this is by using a force. And I think that no one should support evacuation by force. This is not something that we, I think, as Jews, can allow ourselves to contemplate and to execute. This shouldn't be in the toolbox of the things that we believe that we can do in the region. When Israel Katz, the Minister of Defense, said yesterday that he intends to incentivize Gazans to leave, well, let's see how well that will work. I do not expect this to have a major success. I do not expect countries to be willing to accept Gazans in large numbers, regardless of the pressure that President Trump will put on them. This is not something that we need to believe that can materialize. We need to go back to the more concrete solutions, even if they are difficult.
Yeah, and I understand also that Hamas is preventing people to leave, right? I mean,
Of
they
course they
did
are,
that
because
before.
of course they've
Yeah.
been preventing people to leave even when it started. In fact, when the war was in its high intensity, it was important to put pressure on Hamas to allow them to leave so that they could not be hurt in such large numbers. But Hamas used the population as human shields, hid underneath them, went to the tunnels, but prevented not the Gazans not only from leaving Gaza, they prevented the Gazans from going down into the tunnels that they dig. If they would have allowed them to get, there were plenty of room for 1.8 million people in the tunnels. They kept our hostages there, but they did not allow their own people to take shelter in it, let alone to leave Gaza. But this is Hamas malpractice and inhumane activity to its own residents and population. But I think that different kind of thinking will need to take place, and hopefully
So as part of the deal, is there any indication about who will be in charge of preventing smuggling through humanitarian aid or stuff like that?
well, as I said before, first and foremost, this is Israel's responsibility to make sure that this does not happen. A lot of the humanitarian aid will come through Israel, and we will be making sure that this doesn't happen. As things relate to goods that will come through Egypt, I'm not in the weeds of the negotiation between Israel and the U.S., but there are plenty of solutions that can happen. This is exactly the place where private security companies can assume the role of checking the goods and making sure that there is no smuggling coming in. There are various solutions to that. I'm not negotiating on behalf of the Israeli government, so I cannot share what it is that they're doing. But there are concrete and robust solutions to it, provided that there is the entity that is willing to fund it and to take responsibility for it. What is important, as I said before, that Israel puts its effort to make sure that those solutions are there, intact, verifiable, so that things don't get out of hand.
Okay. So I think we're running out of time. So I want to thank you again for being with us today. And I wanted also to remind everybody in every webinar that we hold, we ask you if you're willing to donate. We're raising money to help the hostage families. And I know a lot of the hostages are coming home, and we think that, the worries are gone, but a lot of hostages are still held captive. And even the ones that are coming home need a lot of money to rehabilitate their loved ones. So if you can, please use our link and donate to them. And thank you so much, Eyal. We hope that we'll soon get to the second phase and all of our hostages will be home, and we can start rehabilitating ourselves and Israel, and we'll have some peace and quiet as much as we can in the Middle East.
Thank you, Tali, and thank you everyone who's been watching. I hope this was meaningful and useful.
Thank you so much.